Welcome back, everyone. We're Simply Bitcoin. We break down the news from Twitter, the daily fail, meme review, software releases, hardware releases, and the websites by plebs. Joining us today, very special guest and author of a very awesome book that I implore every Bitcoiner to read, The Price of Tomorrow. I am talking about Jeff Booth. Before he dives in with us, though, we're going to the numbers.
Number time. Number Time is brought to you by Bitcoin 2022. It's going to be the largest Bitcoin conference ever, hosted in sunny Miami Beach, Florida. Chad Saylor, Michael Saylor, Naeem Bukele, Adam Back. The lineup is nuts. Deadmau5 is spinning on the last day. It's going to be crazy. You're not going to want to miss it. And you can take advantage of the link down below for 10% off your tickets to the largest Bitcoin conference in the world, Bitcoin 2022.
At the time of this recording, the block height is 721,366. The Bitcoin price, 39,080. Chain rewrite days, 737. Total public lightning capacity, 3,390.95. Moscow time, 25:59. Blocks to the halvening, 118,634. And an all-new metric that has been added by request from a fellow pleb, the unspent capacity from Samurai Whirlpool, which is a mixing service. And right now, the unspent capacity is 4,398.14 BTC. A lot of mixing going on. Nico, the numbers.
The numbers. So, Phil, I'm going to make you explain this since you added that metric. What is the unspent capacity?
Okay, so essentially what it is it's the capacity of Bitcoin that is currently in the Samurai Whirlpool mixing service. Okay, so Bitcoin, as we have explained in the past, is pseudonymous, right? There are services such as Samurai Whirlpool, CoinJoin, Join Market, and these services are what are called mixers and or coin mixers. And what those do is that you essentially end up mixing your UTXOs, okay, which I know, like, it's like we're going to go down the rabbit hole of UTXOs, but essentially, to try to make it simple, okay, you end up mixing all of the information so that it helps with the fungibility, i.e., the inability or the ability to determine the difference between, let's say, two separate coins. This helps us make them, quote unquote, look more of the same.
Yep, and
I think that's like the simplest type of explanation that I can give without getting too technical and losing everyone.
It helps with the privacy. Helps with the privacy. So
it helps with the privacy.
I pulled this up, and I think it's a perfect thing to talk about a little bit during the number segment. Chad Saylor continues to buy all of the corn and leaves us with nothing. MicroStrategy has purchased an additional 660 Bitcoin for $25 million in cash, an average of 37,865 per Bitcoin. As of 1/31/2022, we hodl 100,025. Phil, what is that number that I can't read? That I'm nervous because Jeff's on the show. Okay,
I know it's tough. It's 125,051 Bitcoin.
Awesome. Acquired for 3.78 billion at an average price of 30,000 per Bitcoin. So again, first thing I want you guys to pay attention to is their average price of 30,000. We got very close to that. I think that's an important psychological number in terms of, you know, the short-term fiat caca price, like we like to say. But another thing that I wanted to mention before I asked Jeff what his thoughts are is that there's 195 countries in the world. If every Bitcoin was equally distributed amongst those countries, every country would get 107,000 Bitcoin, right? So Michael Saylor has more than his fair share, and I think that really highlights the absolute scarcity of Bitcoin, and it highlights the fact that when certain countries start waking up to the fact that this is just better money, there's not going to be enough to go around, right? And yeah, so very exciting future. But anyways, Jeff, what are your thoughts on Michael Saylor buying all the Bitcoin?
So when you, and I posted this the other day on, when your thesis hasn't been invalidated, in fact, it's been strengthened, then what you should do when prices go down is buy more. And Michael Saylor is brilliant at that. And so it went from my book, everything that My thesis hasn't changed at all. In fact, every single thing just reinforces it. And it shows why Bitcoin is so important and the only thing that can get us to the other side. So Michael Saylor is brilliant in this. So I totally understand that game. He does too. He's been around technology for a long time. He understands how technology network effects work, and so he's done the research on this, and I think he's going to win a huge amount because of that.
Yeah, I completely agree. The only thing is, right, and I've heard you mention this a couple times in your thread, right, and I've actually tweeted this out as well, is what worries me a little bit is, not worries me, but it's the transition period, right? And look, and it's just a fact that Michael Saylor, he has a lot more capital, right? So he has a lot more money to invest and surpass a lot of people that got in earlier. But, you know, it's just a fact that Nayib Bukele and Michael Saylor, this is their first year. This is their first cycle. So they're still earning their stripes, right? And of course, it's different because Michael Saylor has a, public company behind him. Nayib Bukele has a country. But if you look at it in the most simplest of sense, they're first year or second year Bitcoiners. Like they're just getting into the game. So I think that's humbling from the perspective of us plebs. You front run Michael Saylor, even though he caught up. But yeah, Phil, what are your thoughts on this?
I just get, you know what, and again, that's the beauty about Bitcoin. It doesn't make a difference how much you own. It doesn't give you any more power over the network. But I sometimes do wonder, is what's his angle, right? What's his entire angle? It's like I don't think it's necessarily. Of course, I got to take the opposite side of this, right? It's like what is the angle, and do we think that he could possibly become, a quote unquote bad actor where he tries to influence, development or something like that? I don't really know. One could make the argument that technically he could be doing that right now with quote unquote the amount of Bitcoin that he owns. But that's the beauty of it, is that the amount of Bitcoin that you own, sure, you may be able to influence certain people for a time, but once you spend that Bitcoin, it's gone and you have to buy it back if you want it back again. So I actually think that in the grand scheme of things, even if he were to become a quote unquote bad actor, it wouldn't be for that long. It would be very temporary, as opposed to right now, our bad actors are infinite because they can print money infinitely, so they can continue to be bad actors the whole entire time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's super important, what you just said. A Bitcoin system drives human ingenuity, and you could hate it, and it benefits everybody who's not on it. Because it drives a free market, and that means prices fall and abundance goes up. So we should be all over. We should be super positive on Michael Saylor, and because he's contributing to that. Every one of us is contributing to making that happen. And it actually, what you said is super important. A lot of people think wealth drives power and it drives influence, and in this system, it doesn't. So in this system, it doesn't, and that's a huge differentiator. We are all predicting markets. If you buy a house, you're predicting a future market for yourself. If you buy anything, you're either choosing not to do something else with that money, or choosing to do something that's. So every one of us is predicting, and that means a market-based economy is uneven, as some people make better predictions.
And
Michael's just making a better prediction.
And
it's okay.
And that's okay, right? I think that the Keynesians have convinced so much of us, right? It's like, no, you can't have these drops. You can't have this. And then it's exactly what you said, Jeff, is Bitcoin it enables a pure free market without any type of interference. And like you said, that's a good thing. But anyways,
if I'm wrong on this, I lose everything. Mm-hmm. That's the way it should be.
Absolutely.
That's exactly the way it should be, and that's the way. I mean, that's the way we thought it was until all of us, or at least that's the way I thought it was growing up, until I learned that wasn't true. No, I learned that if I was, yeah.
Go ahead, Phil. Go ahead, finish.
I was going to say I learned that if I was big enough in the fiat system, that the system won't let me go broke. right? The same way that HSBC wasn't allowed to go broke after the money laundering scandals, right? The same way that even for example, Valiant Pharmaceuticals. You know what I mean? Like they were so huge, they bought so many companies that they couldn't be touched until it was okay. So it's very interesting that our system, that the current system does that. And I like how Bitcoin levels the playing field.
Absolutely. But anyways, Phil, it's time for the Daily Fail.
The Daily Fail is brought to you by Amber App. Check them out, amber.app. It is the easiest way to buy Bitcoin. It's a Bitcoin stacking app by actual toxic Bitcoiners. The link is down below.
Amber, the smart way to stack sats.
Here we go. We're going to go down memory lane. We're going to look at some history, but what's important here is that it is incredibly relevant. I believe it is incredibly relevant to what's going on right now. And although it may not be, I think Nico says this pretty often, although history doesn't repeat, it often rhymes, or did I just get that backwards?
You totally got it right.
I got it right. Okay. All right. So we're going to dive into the story of Weimar Germany's hyperinflation, which a lot of people are familiar with. We're not going to go through the entire, thread. It's a lot to go through, but what we're going to do is we're going to isolate specific components, okay, so that we can zoom out and just extract that information that's really pertinent to what's going on today. All right, so let's dive into it. Weimar Germany's, the tweet is from a Peter Young, or at Peter M.I. Young, and let's dive. Who is Peter? Let's see, who is Peter? What does he like to do? Economics, Bitcoin, cities. All right, I'll go with it. Economics, Bitcoin,
guy.
cities.
I like it. I like it.
And you know what? This is a straightforward tweet storm, so I'll stop ruining it. Weimar Germany's hyperinflation provides perhaps the most dramatic example of the destruction that ensues when money dies. The 16-tweet thread summarizes Adam Ferguson's definitive account and explores the lessons we can learn from the dark period in German history. During World War I, European powers suspended the gold convertibility of their currencies, issued bonds, and printed new bills as a means of financing their war efforts. With varying degrees of severity, each introduced price controls in a misguided attempt to suppress inflation. Now, in the back of your head, you gotta remember that we've been talking about price controls now for quite a while on Simply Bitcoin.
Well, it wasn't. So it was funny because we were essentially making the theory that the Fed is in a situation right now where they've raised rates but they crash the economy, right? Or they continue printing money and there's inflation. And then when Mark Moss came on the show, he's like, "You guys are missing it. There's a third option." And he said price controls. And then it was actually a week later that a CNN article, and then it was, I think, an article from the Telegram in UK or something like that, some legacy publication in the UK was, hey, we should be thinking about price controls to control inflation. So it's just funny how history, once again, is repeating itself as the money continues to break.
That's right. That is exactly right. Okay, so German price controls were the most stringent enforced in Europe. At the same time, international isolation forced the government to rely heavily on inflationary domestic bond issuance for their financing. The German currency was heavily debased through printing of unbacked paper marks. Well, that sounds familiar. Before the war, the British shilling, French franc, Italian lira, and German mark were worth about the same. By the end of 1918, the mark had lost approximately 75% of its exchange value against each. In late 1921, prices began to rise rapidly, but rather than demand a stable purchasing power for the marks they had, Germans demanded more marks to buy what they needed. They failed to see that higher prices were a causal manifestation of the ballooning supply of currency. And I know this is going to sound, kind of out of place, but this piece right here reminds me of when, if you asked people before the automobile, would you like a machine that moves fast, that has an engine that can go, let's say, 20, 30 times faster than a horse or whatever it is? If you asked them back then, what would they want? They would have told you that they wanted faster horses. And it may seem unrelated, but it's the point of we can't really see the exponentials. As humans, we're very poor at being able to extrapolate the exponentials. And this is, I think, one of the reasons why people demanded more marks rather than having their marks worth more. They just didn't get it. Anyways, let's continue on. Germany had continuously printed unbacked paper marks since 1914, but prices hadn't responded in a linear way, which is very similar to what we're seeing right now. We've had massive money printing, but we're not really seeing yet the quote-unquote hyperinflation. Anyways, Germans failed to comprehend the monetary expansion. Prices rose and fell in fits and starts. Inflation manifested itself gradually, then suddenly. Okay, and let's take a look at that chart that they're showing right here. German price inflation lagged money supply growth. And you can see what happens right here in 1921. It just shoots to the roof. Almost a hockey stick. I mean, that's kind of like a goalie stick. All right, let's continue on. By 1923, 30 paper mills and 2,000 printing presses were adding perpetually to the blizzard of banknotes under which the German economy had already been consumed. At the end of that year, it took... What is that? Is that a trillion?
It's million, billion. Yeah, it's a trillion. It's 1 trillion.
It is a trillion. I had it right the first time. Yes. Anyway, so it took 1 trillion marks to buy one British shilling. 1 trillion. Anyways, that's just completely insane. And of course, you guys can see the chart right here. And again, not a goalie stick. That's a hockey stick. Anyways, this is pretty nasty, right? And this is way after the fact. So they had already printed this money. You know, the politicians get to sit there and say, don't worry, we're fixing everything. But then all of a sudden you wake up one day and you can't afford shit. Okay? That's really what happens. Anyways, continuing on. The result was monumental human tragedy. Inflation destroyed German savings, and with them, the fabric of society. Cantillon effects, or Cantillon effects, however you want to pronounce it, redistributed wealth in seemingly arbitrary ways. Debtors received windfalls, while creditors, savers, and fixed income earners were wiped out. That sounds familiar. Mm-hmm. Wow. Anyways, poverty grew, and along with it, a widespread feeling that those with wealth had acquired it illegitimately. Amongst the poor, theft became common. Others resorted to graft, fraud, and bribery. The traditional virtues of thrift, honesty, and hard work lost their appeal. That sound like Atlas Shrugged? Sure does. Finally, toward the end of 1923, a new currency called the Rentenmark was introduced with a much scarcer supply. The old paper mark was allowed to inflate to oblivion. When it died, it left behind a deep and damaging legacy. Modern advanced economies are unlikely to experience hyperinflation. But examining Weimar Germany brings into focus the ways in which inflation subverts the social order. This is the meat and potatoes of the whole thing. The difference between today's low and stable inflation and hyperinflation is one of degree, not kind. The central banks today pursue inflation as a deliberate policy. Although less overt when kept low, inflation remains a clandestine way of siphoning resources from the productive economy. Its Cantillon effects are the real cause of inequality, commonly blamed on free markets, and you can put in brackets there, capitalism. The most important thing to remember is that inflation is not an act of God, that inflation is not a catastrophe of the elements or a disease that comes like the plague. Inflation is a policy. In the past year, global money supply has accelerated while output has fallen. This is something else that's mentioned, right? As the quality of money deteriorates, the productivity of workers and what they output also deteriorates. US dollar supply has grown 25%. This new money likely won't lead to sudden CPI rise, but its redistributive effects will manifest themselves in complex ways through the financial sector. In 2020, government debt reached unprecedented levels. As debt grows, it puts upward pressure on inflation. Higher interest rates would be necessary to control it, but even modest rises could trigger a crisis that would result in the creation of an entirely new financial order. Great resets? Type of? No? It's okay. We're not going to bring that into this. As this happens, many are opting for traditional safe havens, but a growing number are choosing an emerging digital alternative to the legacy fiat system, Bitcoin. Its fixed supply and censorship resistance make it a strong, decentralized alternative to central banking. Okay, just to wrap this up, I honestly wish I could go through every single country and show all of the, the money supply increases. But, being ethnocentric, I'm here in the U.S. I'm going to show you the U.S. money printing. Okay, so here we go. It's the United States money supply, and you can clearly see here. You know what? Let's just do a max chart to make it really simple. Okay, there you go. 1968 all the way up, and you can just see it is just up and to the right. So they are, and you can clearly see right here that there's a massive acceleration after 2016. Okay, so that was covered in the tweet thread that we just talked about, massive money printing. The other part of it is the massive loss of purchasing power of the dollar. Okay, and here we can clearly see a nice little graph of the dollar's worth. Okay, and we can see a nice little timeline of all the different little things that happened, and watching the dollar value just drop and drop and drop. I sometimes feel like we're living in a giant experiment. And I sometimes when I read back at these types of stories throughout history, like Weimar Germany or like the Romans, the Roman Empire, I start to think we are living right now in essentially the central banker's perfected system. And when I say this, I put asterisks next to it, because when I mean perfected, I mean a system that robs us so perfectly that we can't really tell until Bitcoin. They didn't expect Bitcoin. And before Bitcoin, it was very difficult because gold is a bit of a sliding scale. Now, granted, I was a person who was purchasing gold, but I also understood or believed that it was heavily manipulated, okay, and controlled by certain groups of people. So when I was introduced to Bitcoin, this just got me really excited. And because it wasn't controlled by some small group of people and anyone can join or leave the network at will, it just, Bitcoin doesn't care. And this is where we can see now the fruition of this quote unquote perfected inflation theft system that they've created. Now, the next step to this is obviously the CBDCs, right? Where they can steal from us while they're stealing from us. It's theft upon theft upon theft, okay? Because let's face it, right? They can steal from you for traveling into the wrong part of town. They can steal from you for having a low social credit system. It just becomes endless theft even while you're sleeping, which, don't get me wrong, we're technically being stolen from while we sleep right now. But that is a much more measured control of theft. So yes, to wrap this all up, I think that what we're seeing with inflation is actually, it's not a deconstruction. What it is to make sure that the world's resources are specifically controlled by the people that believe that they are able to control the resources best.
I wouldn't even say that. I would just say that the system incentivizes certain types of behavior, and the fiat system, because they're not dudes in the back room twirling their mustaches, okay? It's just that the fiat system incentivizes that type of behavior. It's built into the system, right? Whereas Bitcoin, it incentivizes different types of behavior and it rewards different types of behavior. So I think from our perspective, we're watching that and we'll say, hey, these people are evil. I think that they're just working for their incentives. They're just like this, I'm incentivized to do this, and this is how it goes. Now, a couple things, right, is Weimar Republic was so catastrophic to Germany, right, that it convinced people to duly elect a very shade, which YouTube does not like, to speak about this government in the 1930s and 40s, but they were so desperate, the people, that they chose to elect a fascist government that committed some of the worst atrocities in humankind. And the other observation that I want to make is, it's funny when you were reading that, and the Romans did the same thing. They debased the currency, right? So it goes on. Did inflation a role or a cause or partly responsible for the downfall of the Roman Empire? Right? So again, just questions to ask, but clearly human beings have been doing this for so long, and for the first time ever, Bitcoin gives us a chance to break that cycle. Anyways, Jeff, do you have any thoughts, ideas?
So number one, Peter Young, who wrote that tweet thread, he sent me this the other day. He goes, "Your latest interview on IGWT was profound, especially when about halfway through you explained why you're focusing most of your energy on Bitcoin rather than hard money such as gold. Your work is having a huge impact on a lot of people. Please keep it up." So Peter is awesome. People should follow him, but I just so what throughout time, and by the way, I think you just hit on a critical thing that said it's us that demands it, and we empower a government. The government is a choice of all of us, and so our short-term nature to be able to, because if we all stood up and said we're not going to have this anymore, it would end tomorrow. But we don't, and why don't we? Because our short-term nature, I mean collectively, wants to believe we can get more than we can. And so we would not elect a government who said, here's the truth, we don't have enough money, and we have to cut services to be able to pay. We would rather hear, we got lots of money, we'll just take it out of your other pocket, and rob you while we're paying for it. And that natural thing, and that's what happened with gold money. And it did, by the way, this is the break of Roman civilization as well. And it's always been the break. And it's been the break because what ends up happening, that transfer of wealth to the haves from the have-nots, there's more have-nots than the haves. And even deeper than that, it's because on a hard money such as gold, you had to build a credit-based system on top of it. And a credit-based system must grow forever. And so you start, and so you just keep on building more and more credit, because if you don't let it grow forever, especially when, if you don't then you have a depression as the money gets wiped out. And so by trying to stop the depressions, because society wants to stop them and will vote for anybody who will stop it, you enable people to essentially encode grift into capitalism, and it's not a free market. And once you've done that, once you encode that into it, then all of the wealthy people that know the system won't fail no matter what, you created an incentive to know the game. And once that incentive is created, then everybody races in to try to get their share in a system, and this entire system breaks down. That's what you're seeing throughout society today, and the repercussions are really important. So just ask yourself this, and it's really simple. We don't that inflation deflation. We don't question. We believe that 2% inflation is okay. Majority of people would say that's okay. So what they're really saying is, I believe it's okay to steal from this group of people and transfer it to this group of people at 2%. But 5% is bad, or 10% is bad. And so we don't question the theft, we question the rate of theft, which is crazy. And it's because people believe that you must have theft in your currency to have a productive society. And it's simply not true.
And I'm so glad that you ended with that, Jeff, because that's exactly what we are going to debunk on the news. And yeah, it's just absolutely, it's mind-blowing, the fact that we've repeated this over and over again. But I think the part that blows my mind more is the fact that I knew there was problems with the system, but it was really Bitcoin that really shined the light of truth onto this. And then you're just looking at, I would say, the majority of the population, they're still denominating on a fiat standard. And I think that people don't understand all of the unintended consequences, whether that's short time preference behavior, or I would say morally questionable behavior, that this broken money system incentivizes. It enables that. It actually, I would even go on a limb, I would say it rewards it.
but what would it do to society on that? So if you're in the system and you can't pay for your bills, and a government says, a new government, a fascist government comes in and says, we're going to change all the laws and everything else because those rich people took your money, you'll vote them in, and you'll give up your individual rights and freedoms to vote them in. Mm-hmm. And so that's a really important dilemma we have here in Bitcoin too. If the money stops being printed, it has to, you know this from my book, but it has to exponentially rise as technology goes there. Otherwise, it has to, mathematically. Otherwise, the entire system fails through a deflationary spiral. And the deflationary spiral, not the deflation I talk about in my book, the good market economy driven productivity. We're talking about a debt collapse, but the entire system rests on top of the debt collapse, that debt collapse. So everything fails to the ground. And what would happen? What do you think would happen to human nature as everything collapsed and they couldn't get food, and banks collapsed and they couldn't get their money? Who do you think they would vote in to be able to give up their individual rights and freedoms to be able to print more money?
Anybody.
And you would see, and so you're seeing the start of this all over the world, and it's driven by us as human nature, because most people don't understand what this system that we're built on cannot function. It's mathematically impossible for it to function. There is no free market, and there is no free market at all if all markets rely on printing of money, manipulation of money.
Now, Jeff, one last point before we move on to the meme review. I have no doubt in my mind that Bitcoin wins at the end. But what worries me is the transition. What worries me is the time between, because at the end of the day, right, governments, especially if you live in a country that, is a respected fiat currency, they benefit tremendously from the power of the money printer. And they're paying, right now they're spending a lot more than they're taking in. If when they come off of this, it's going to be like junkie coming off of, whatever type of drugs he was taking. He's going to have a withdrawal. And I suspect a lot of these giant bureaucratic machines, I know in the US, the federal government employs 9 million people, for example, right? So that is, there's all these people that are showing in, day out. They're putting in their work, their time, their energy into something. They have no idea they're being swindled. But they're not going to be thinking from a clear of, oh, yeah, it was the money that was broken all along. You have these politicians that, happen. It's like, no, it wasn't us. It was those people. We have to get those people. And it creates a polarization. Does the transition period worry you? Because
that's why I just said what I did. The transition period should worry everybody. Transition period should be, if you don't think kind of, the wolf story, kind of, you have two wolves on which one do you feed? If you think that it gets its power, if you think that human nature has changed over the last 5,000 years, it hasn't. We're the same people. And if you have an incentive system that is driven for humans to make the worst decisions, they will, and they won't know it. And their minds actually change over time, and society changes. If you look around, that's why I try to keep a neutral. It's not us versus them. It's not a system, because the more you do that, I understand it. I understand why people do it, but the more you do it, you create these camps, these islands, and this is really important. Everything is connected. All of these islands are connected through, because when you have misinformation and money, the connective tissue of all these islands, they all look like separate islands of somebody's right, somebody's wrong, and they're all fighting. And all of these are, because money is just the information between us. And somehow in our brains, we think we're on one side, we want our houses to go up forever, and we want all our businesses to go up forever, but we're inside that labor of those businesses. And on the other side, we want our prices to come down forever. Right. So there's this, they're both two sides of that coin. And all over the world, that market-based economy, if you favor these people over these people, it just starts to break down. So do I worry about this? Yes, I worry about it a lot. And so how do I think about my time? How do I think about my time for my kids? I don't need more money. I don't need any of that. I don't need to be on the show. I don't need to. So how do I think about my time? Is I am making a choice with my time to invest my time into something that I think is helpful to transition to the world. Because I believe if more people understand what this means, then we transition it's going to be ugly on the way through, but more people make that transition and understand this real, how big and how important that is. And so I vote with my time, and we all do. We all spend our time, and so you could look in a mirror and you could say, is my life the way I want my life to be? If it isn't, it's you. It's nobody else. And so so I'm voting with my time to try to make an impact here.
Absolutely. Beautifully put.
Yeah.
And I think this goes for everyone, right? We all have a role to play, whether that's making memes, whether that's writing awesome books, whether that's making funky YouTube shows, right? We all have a role to play in this peaceful revolution. And I love the other point that you made, Jeff. And we have the same beliefs on this show. We say we're apolitical in terms of the fiat political parties, like we like to call them. We stand for, we support, we're single issue voters. We vote for or support any candidate that supports Bitcoin, whether they're on the political left or political right. And I think that's really important moving forward, so it doesn't become a partisan issue. But we'll see what happens. But anyways, Phil, it's time for Daily Meme Review. The Daily Meme Review is brought to you by Citadel 21. It's the best Bitcoin cultural zine. It's stories, articles, topics, really cool stuff by savage toxic Bitcoiners. This is the artwork for volume 10. Every volume it changes, and they're scarce. There's only 1,000 copies made per volume. Get your print of Citadel 21 today. All right, everybody, the first meme is brought to us by Nicholas Berti, definitely a fellow pleb. He has El Salvador and the lightning thing in his handle. Definitely a pleb. Stay on the fiat standard in the car. Adopt Bitcoin as legal tender at Latin American countries.
I love that template, by the way.
This is a meme responding to the Biden administration is reportedly preparing to release an executive action to regulate Bitcoin as a matter of national security. The Bitcoinator, United States, Russia, mining regulators, plebs in the background. All right, moving on to the next one. This is by the Bitcoin account. This is the price dropping through the floor. I think we all have been there, felt that. Anyways, moving on to the next one by Neil Jacobs. I heard he bought the dip and now has a whole Bitcoin. This is hilarious. All right, moving on. RD, that moment you realize you first heard about Bitcoin in 2014. Me, your younger self. And Spintic Crusader, crypto. Oh, amazing. Great memes. Phil, you came through today, bro. Those are solid choices. Thank you to the plebs that are in our Telegram group. Join it so you can link us some more dank Bitcoin memes review. For that, Phil, I'm going to give it one of Samson Mao's hats, the Taproot hat. And I have the other one, too, the user-activated soft fork. That one's awesome, too. What would you give those memes, Phil?
Oh, my gosh. Yeah, no, those were pretty good memes. I was enjoying them very much. Okay, you know what? I'm going to go, and we are going to give it an official saw blade. Saw blade! All the scams.
Woo! Wow, okay. That's right, everyone. We are going to make Jeff Booth review some memes. Jeff Booth.
Yeah, I love them so much that I'm going to give them my Yeti mic. My travel Yeti mic.
Nice.
Awesome.
That's the first time we've gotten a mic as a score. Sweet.
Yeah, those are good scores. Anyways, guys, we want to know if you agree with our scores. If you disagree, let us know down in the comment sections. Comment. And, of course, make sure to subscribe to us on alternative video platforms because we do say things that piss off central bankers like Rumble.com and our personal favorite, BitcoinTV.com. They don't censor there because Bitcoin TV. But anyways, Phil, it's time for the Daily News. Brought to you by CryptoCloaks.com. They make the best 3D printed Bitcoin merch, like the 3D printed Bitcoin Honey Badger opens up. You put your favorite hardware wallet in there. Or the 3D printed Bitcoin art grenade also opens up. You put your favorite hardware wallet in there as well. Really cool stuff. And you can take advantage of the link down below for 5% off CryptoCloaks.com. All right, everybody, guess what? We brought the heavyweight Jeff Booth, and he is about to debunk. Look, if you ask Google right now, you say, why is inflation necessary? This Investopedia thing is one of the first things that pop up, right? And the name of the article is when inflation is good for the economy. So I'm going to read this, and hopefully Jeff doesn't spontaneously explode. Combust. And let's see if we could debunk this methodically, right? And the article starts, when the economy is not running at capacity, meaning there is unused labor or resources, inflation theoretically helps. Give them credit, they did say theoretically, okay? Inflation theoretically helps increase production. More dollars translates to more spending, which equates to more aggregated demand. More demand, in turn, triggers more production to meet that demand. Jeff, what do you have to say about that?
So you I think you called it out. On a credit-based system, if you allow the credit to collapse and the credit is the system, then people save, and they save more and more and more, and it causes an unwind because what they're doing is predicting their future and realizing, oh my God, I need money to be able to live. And so they would pull the money from banks in that case. They would hide it under the mattress if that was the case. And if the bank is set up on top of it's just credit, it would continue to cascade down. So a lot of people falsely believe that you have to have inflation. Inflation you do in a credit-based economy. You do if the entire economy is based on credit, because that cascading failure would be every bank would fail because they don't actually sit on money, they sit on credit, and it's connected all over the world. So that the error code in that thinking is, and what nobody tells you is, on a credit-based system, it looks like this, and they also don't tell you what that leads to, because that leads to the hyperinflation events and the and the long-term debt cycles and everything else, and it leads to the destruction of free market capitalism, a market-based economy, because it has to consolidate more and more power in the state, and it has to remove individual rights and freedoms as it does, because people start waking up to what ends up happening. So, but it is required for a credit-based system, and now let's tilt to a non-credit-based system. Could you does it require that same inflation to be able to survive? And what you think about it in that same market-based economy is, everything we do, if we're not making the same mistake over and over again, especially if you add technology to that, and the technology is moving exponentially. So you have millions of people trying to create value for you, and capital goes into those hundreds of millions of people trying to create value. Capital goes into those businesses that tries to create value. And if they're not successful in delivering value to you, they fail, and the capital gets just destroyed. And if they're successful in delivering value to you, prices fall, your abundance goes up. You get more time, because otherwise you wouldn't use it. This, what we're using right now, this service that's going to touch millions of people, this through this podcast could touch millions of people. 20 years ago, you couldn't have seen this. You wouldn't have seen this, because it would have been the news organizations would have chose who got to see what, and the cost didn't come down. So all of these things that are being created must reduce prices or give us more for less. And unless you have an economy that allows that to happen naturally, if you allow economy to allow that to happen, the society, all of us, just gets more and more for less. There's abundance everywhere. And those giant markets that people think, oh, those ones are expensive, they won't change. Mm-hmm. Where do you think the entrepreneurs will go after? What do you think they'll go after? Will they go after the low margin businesses? or will they attack the high margin businesses? So it just keeps on going. So in other words, one system requires us to buy more and more and more and more forever. And if we're buying more and more, it needs more and more labor forever. At the same time, technology is removing that labor. So it needs more manipulation forever. And that manipulation leads to more control over your life forever. And the other system leads to abundance through a totally different lens of a system.
So I'm going to continue. That was a phenomenal answer.
Yeah.
We're gonna destroy this. Or not we. Jeff is gonna destroy this. Really.
We're gonna cheer him on.
But anyways, check this out. And I thought this was hilarious. The second paragraph begins with British economist John Maynard Keynes. Right? Yeah. Look at that guy. Believed that some inflation was necessary to prevent the paradox of thrift, which says, if this is what you were talking about earlier, Jeff, if consumer prices are allowed to fall consistently because the country is becoming too productive, consumers learn to hold off their purchases to wait for a better deal, right? This is what you addressed earlier. But he says the net effect of this paradox is to reduce aggregate demand, leading to less production, layoffs, and a faltering economy. So, Jeff, the question that I have for you is, so if it's a credit-based system, what would a Bitcoin system be like, and how do you address that sentence specifically? If Keynes was in front of you, if Phil and I were clones of Keynes, and you had to talk with him, what would you say?
Yeah, on a Bitcoin system, it just does exactly what I just said. But because this is so hard to see from the existing system that we're in, and people study Keynes, and all of the schools teach it, and all of the monetary theory of the world, all the central banks are full of it. You see it on the news every time. People haven't done the research, and does that stand true at first principles? They haven't asked themselves this question: would I still buy food? Okay, yep, food I'd still buy. Would I still buy a place to live? Yep, place to live I'd still buy. Would I still buy an iPhone? Because the iPhone has come down in price. You've gotten more and more from every single iPhone as it's fallen in price, and people still line up around the block for the new tick. I'd still buy that. Every one of us makes a choice at every time in our lives to be, and that choice is on that prediction of time versus money, of what I want. And central banks can't stop that choice. And so if they're what they're saying is, I'm going to force the choice because I'm going to destroy their time and money. And I'm going to make them buy things that they wouldn't buy. Does that make sense? Does that make any sense? Is that sustainable for the same people that talk about the environment? Inflation equals the destruction of this planet. Because if you believe that logic, that I need, my money is going to be worth less and less and less, so I can buy more and more and more, so we can have more and more jobs, so we can juice the prices of everything unnaturally. That is climate destruction, because you can't grow forever on a finite planet. And so all of these things are connected, and people don't ask themselves, what would I do?
Mm-hmm. It is a total it's like waking up from the Matrix. That's the best analogy. It really is. And like discovering the truth. Anyways, Jeff, there was an awesome pinned tweet that I want to go over. An excellent thread. I recommend. I'm going to put it down in the link description for you guys to go through the whole thing. But I think this part fascinates me, and it's just because of this screenshot. And look at the date, everyone, but I'll get to it in a second. But Jeff says, as a wrapped framework of growth for the sake of growth and manipulated markets is exposed, different winners / different losers, the reason policymakers keep changing the rules is to pretend they're still in control. That is fascinating. That is fascinating to me, and I think that the behavior of the Fed as of late, where it's so funny, the whole economy is controlled by this guy on Wednesday, just goes in front of him. He's like, we're going to raise it, but not yet, and we might do it in the future. We'll let you know, right? It's absolutely hysterical. And I read that, and I'm like, And Jeff continues to say, and use their currencies as weapon to gain advantage in trade, and which is what you're doing. We've covered this many times in the show. The United States weaponizing the dollar, right? Towards their political rivals. We see Biden, essentially saying, "Hey, we're going to put sanctions on Russia." But what they don't speak about, right, is when they put sanctions on, whether it's Russia, whether it's Cuba, whether it's Afghanistan, right? Millions of people in those countries. Yes, the evil governments of those countries, they get hurt, I guess, right? But also millions of people also get excluded from the legacy financial system as well, which people don't talk about. But anyways, I think this is the kicker, right? September 4th, 2007, it is not the responsibility of the Federal Reserve, nor would it be appropriate to protect lenders and investors from the consequences of their financial decisions. Ben Bernanke, and here's the chairman of the Federal Reserve during the financial crisis. And it's funny because a year later, 2 years later, that's exactly what they did. They bailed out the banks, right? And it's funny because essentially Bitcoin was born around this time, right? In the Genesis block, which it's so crazy. Bitcoin's mythology. It says Chancellor on the brink of the second bailout for banks. Satoshi knew that banks would keep debasing the money, and I would like to believe that was a major incentive to create something like Bitcoin. And then Jeff goes on to say the changing of the rules and an understanding of why sound money is critical for society is what is driving Bitcoin adoption. And here's the fascinating part, and I'm going to ask you about this, Jeff. It is early still, but people are starting to wake up to the fact that their currencies are rigged and will eventually break. So, Jeff, what do you mean? I'm going to inject some hopium into everybody. What do you mean by it's early still?
We are so early on the Bitcoin transition. We are but again, most people in Bitcoin are measuring it from prices going up, the price of Bitcoin going up. Mm-hmm. What they're unfortunately doing is actually reinforcing the existing system by doing so. So they're measuring their world in fiat dollars, and they think Bitcoin's going up, and so they sell it if it goes down a bit. If they measured their world in everything falling against Bitcoin forever, they would realize it's the only free market we have. And so what that transition is, it's really hard for our minds to make that transition because you'll go and especially in our economies or in the West economies, is everything around you, your house, you go for groceries, everything is measured in that same fiat system. And so your general pattern is to measure everything in that fiat system, and then get uptight if there's a fall in Bitcoin price, or everybody's talking about what price it'll go to. Yes, in fiat dollars, and depending on what country you're in, as these currencies break one after another, it's going to go way up in that denomination of whatever currency you're using. But what's really happening all around the globe is, as this gets stronger, this network gets stronger and stronger, everything is falling against it, everything, and will forever.
Amazing. Phil, go ahead.
Oh no, I just wanted to point out, right? If going back to that tweet from Ben Bernanke, that is so predictive and hilarious. I just want to show a different angle to it. They're storytellers, right? They're telling you a story. So a year before they know, or I shouldn't say they know, but a year before the financial crisis starts to occur, they're setting the expectation that, listen, the businesses need to survive on their own. The Federal Reserve has no say in this. We are not going to intervene. And we keep repeating that. And then all of a sudden a situation occurs and they intervene. So if you ask me, and I know Nico, I know like they're not like, twirling their mustaches and all that good stuff, but it seems awfully convenient that they set the stage to make everybody accept that the bailouts needed to happen. Or let me rephrase that, not necessarily everybody, but the stakeholders. Okay, we'll call them the stakeholders. The stakeholders had to accept it. And it's just, I find it convenient, right? No, we're not going to interfere. But look, we have this thing happening right now. We need to interfere. And then, the average person goes, well, if it's that bad, they said they wouldn't interfere. This must be really bad. Mm-hmm. So
But
if you
again,
ask me, I think it's a little bit of, it's some marketing and some salesmanship.
It's so easy to think that, but now take the opposite side, because I almost lost my business in 2008, and we had containers all over the world that for 3 days nobody would take our money. We had tons of money in our bank, and no counterparty bank would take the LCs because they didn't trust. It wasn't us. They didn't trust the money was in the bank, and it wasn't. That's when I realized it. The entire system is a sham, and it's required this. So if you had a credit collapse, it just cascades and it collapses everything around the world. So ask yourself in 2008, when they did that, what choice did they have? Like you could, and they didn't have a choice. And again, we were sitting there in a business, and our business dropped by 75% in a couple of days, and the kind of everything. But it just all lines froze. Banks wouldn't take money, and so when they came out with TARP and everything else, we kind of knew they were going to. But what you're getting at it is, and that's why, and what Nico said, it is a system thing. And what you could convince yourself, if you're on top of the monetary order, there is, I have to, because I'm saving society, and you could believe that, and you could believe in your bullshit, because and by the way, it might be true too, but what that does at a first principles levels is it encodes graft into the system, and the same architects of the crisis get rewarded as you socialize the loss. Now the question is this: if you've done it once, twice, 3 times, 8 times, do more people know that you have to do it again, or do less people know you have to do it again?
More.
Exactly.
Wow.
So what happens is the entire hedge fund market, BlackRock, everybody races in because they know they have a free put. They know they're going to make money, massive money, by extracting it from the population. And socialist governments then jump in and say, it's those people, we're going to tax them more, and it's those people's fault. And most of their revenue comes from more picking your pockets. So because you can't pay the taxes, you can't pay this back by taxes. It's a system problem. But I understand why this. Again, it's why I wrote the book.
So, Jeff, this leads me to the last question, which is, and I'm going to go back to this transition. I'm going to give you guys a few examples of what's been happening as of late, right? You had the signaling from the IMF, right? You have, I would say, a combined effort and narrative. We covered the article from The Guardian yesterday. You hear the political rhetoric from Elizabeth Warren, right? Essentially, proof of work is dangerous to the climate, right? All of that narrative. Make no mistake, those are, coincidentally, I don't think this is a coincidence, but the World Economic Forum saying, hey, proof of work is bad, but proof of stake, a system which we can continue doing what we're doing now, that is good. That and coincidentally, that is what the people said at the Congress hearing, cleaning up crypto Congress hearing. They said the same thing. Proof of stake is good, but proof of work is bad. And it goes on to say, are they really concerned about the climate, or are they really concerned about control, right? Because proof of work coincidentally doesn't allow them to make money at no cost, right? So my question to you, Jeff, is, again, more of this transition. Do you see a country like the United States? The United States is difficult because of how it's structured, and individual states have a lot of power over the federal government. But I'll say the United States. But do you see the United States or a country, or not a country, but Europe, following the path of China to keep the legacy system alive, to keep the politicians in power? Do you see that happening?
Because of the Constitution and because states have individual power, the U.S. will break apart before that happens. Game theory and driving Bitcoin, you'll have states that will not let that happen. They will secede from the nation before that happens, and you'll have a revolution in the states before that happens. Other countries start adopting Bitcoin. This could be really messy. on the way through, and it could be really because of how much. And this is human nature. If you can control, and this ties to kind of all of the other proof of stake and all of the nonsense that you're talking about. If you just go back to what I'm about to say, if you could control a system where you benefit or your group of people benefits by unfairly taking something from somebody else, so you benefit and another group loses. Human nature says that system will always be corrupted by people who could do it throughout history and time. Mm-hmm. That is what gold kept doing right through it. It took a long time. It was a really good system. It was the best that was there for a long time, but it was human nature says if you could corrupt a system, you would corrupt a system. And so there is nothing I have seen, nothing other than Bitcoin that removes that human nature.
Yeah.
And allows a system to remain decentralized, and that therefore allows the abundance gained from a free market and technology growth to be broadly shared. Nothing I've seen. It's the only thing.
Absolutely, it's uncorruptible money. It's rules without rulers. It's separating human beings away from the monetary policy. That's the innovation. That's something that only Bitcoin could do, and none of these imitations and proof of stake especially cannot do. And I love what you said.
Can I just tie into that?
Of course.
But it also shows how much power and manipulation and that you would take, what you would do to try to drive a different narrative. Because if you could control that narrative, or if you could drive kind of that Ethereum break, let's use that as an example. And you could drive the same economics that it was going up in price and everybody thought forever it was going to go up in price. And then you could take all the economics and control it. Or a government could, or someone else, or you could go into Amazon centers and say, or you could go to the council who makes the rules and say, here are the new rules, otherwise you're going to be in jail. You would control it. Yep. And so there's so much influence because to be able to control a system that overrides all of human action. You can understand through that lens why people would be kind of all the FUD narratives and everything else.
Go ahead.
Proof of work, Bitcoin is the only thing, if you believe in climate change, it's the only thing that can stop climate change.
I absolutely agree. We've been saying that for so long. And I love what you said about the United States, Jeff, because we've been hammering in the same point, right? Is that we see Bitcoin following the path of the marijuana industry, right, where it becomes legal tender on a state level. We already saw it from Arizona, right? This isn't even theory anymore, right? It's fascinating how this is playing out. But, I don't know if it's going to pass, but you had Wendy Rogers, a state senator from Arizona, already, try to pass a bill in Arizona saying, hey, let's make Bitcoin, unfortunately, shitcoin. She doesn't know, but hey, it's a start. Legal tender in Arizona, and I completely agree. I don't see Texas and Florida and Wyoming, they're going to fight this tooth and nail. And
what they're doing, and what you just said about Wendy about adding in crypto into that bill. By the way, I'm very close to this in some other regions, as you could imagine, from different politicians and things coming in from other regions, very close to this. Mm-hmm. What some of them are trying to do is make sure some of them actually know that Bitcoin's going to win this whole thing, but they're trying to ensure that they have the votes to be able to make the entire industry go.
What do you mean? Could you elaborate a little bit more? I'm sorry.
So when you said shitcoins or altcoins, they're trying not to shut out Web3. We know where that goes.
Yeah.
But they're trying to make sure what they're doing is opening up a free market to the whole thing, because they can't say I'm in for a free market, but I'm only in for one of them.
They don't want to. I get it. They want to look. They want to play nice, right?
And I disagree. Yeah. So and it's not that I disagree, but as politicians, they can only influence what they can influence by all of your votes. And so they need enough votes to be able to make sure that these laws pass, to be able to broaden that audience. That's what's happening.
This is fascinating. Wow. So much signal today. Thank you, Jeff. But anyways, Phil, there was an open source software release today. Why don't you tell everybody about it?
Software releases. The software releases are brought to you by CipherSafe. Check them out, cyphersafe.io. Everybody needs to store their seed. You may as well make it the most secure you can. Check out the Cypher Wheel, great place to store your seed, or the all-new Cypher Grid. Both come complete with punch tool and tamper-resistant wire. What? All right, we've got Lightning Terminal version 0.6.2-alpha that was released. It's down below in the show notes. Guys, Monday through Saturday, rain or shine, we post episodes unless we tell you that we don't. Check us out, our audio-only episodes. You can find them on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Anchor.
Awesome. Thank you, Phil. All right, guys, that was our show. Before we go, I want to give a very special shout-out to our awesome guests. Go give him a follow on Twitter @JeffBooth. And, of course, buy his book. This is a must-read, especially if you're a Bitcoiner. We're going to put the Amazon link down below. And, guys, that was the show. If you enjoyed the show, smash that like button. And, of course, if you want to continue hearing the Bitcoin news from the plebe perspective, and the catastrophic fails from the central bankers. Some of them might be evil. Klaus Schwab is definitely evil. But anyways, consider subscribing to Simply Bitcoin. We'll see you tomorrow, guys, for a brand new episode.
Quoting Jeff Booth, we vote with our time.